Let me start by asking you a question. What comes to mind when you hear the phrase free people? Okay, maybe it's a patriotic flag or a clothing brand. Let's try that again. What comes to mind when you hear someone has become a free person? Is it someone that got out of jail, like now they're free to join the rest of the population? Someone that got their driver's license and now they're free to drive themselves? Or someone that graduated high school and now they're free from 8 hours a day at school and annoying homework? Or is it someone that turned 18 or even 21? Now they're free to be considered an adult and make their own decisions. Those are all really different scenarios, but they have one thing in common: freedom. Freedom is one of the best and hardest things about high school. And here's what I mean. In high school, you're probably freer than you've ever been. Like, you don't have to stay in the same classroom all day. You don't have someone telling you where to eat lunch. Chances are your parents are letting you go more places and do more stuff without them than they ever had before. But at the same time, freedom is one of the hardest things, because even though we have more than we've ever had, we still don't have all the freedom that we want. Like, if you're in high school, chances are you want to be able to make your own decisions, or you want to be able to live outside the restrictions of the authority figures around you, or you want to be able to go on a road trip with your friends and not have to run it by anybody. For you, freedom is a break from the rules. It's saying goodbye to your school's rules and your parents or step-parents' rules and your teachers' rules. Yeah, freedom means making your own rules. Like, no more curfew because you're too young to stay out too late. No more get a parent signature because you're too young to give yourself permission. No more text me where you are when you get there because you're too young to be anywhere without your mom knowing your location at all times. I mean, come on. I mean, that way, getting older leads to more freedom because you don't have to live with all those kinds of rules. In other words, freedom is basically the opposite of having something or someone control you. And that sounds good to just about everybody. And that's why some people have a hard time with the ideal of God or church or the Bible. Because understandably, when it comes to freedom from control, a lot of people feel the opposite of freedom at church. And maybe you felt that way. I mean, let's face it. Many of us think that Christianity is all about rules. You may not have grown up in the church, but I did. And my understanding of Christianity started with the Ten Commandments. It was a whole bunch of thou shalt nots, and my parents did everything they could to make sure that was a rule follower, right? And over time, this began to shape my view of God. I saw him as a God that was all about what I did and didn't do, kind of like a scorekeeper in a basketball game. And maybe you can relate. Maybe you've always seen God as a rules person too. And like everyone from the church, to the preachers, to the Bible, kind of seem to back that up. And for some of you, your parents back that up. Thou shalt not drink alcohol, and thou shalt not have sex. Thou shalt not cheat on any school assignment. Thou shalt not say a cuss word unless you only say the first letter or whisper them. Thou shalt pray and read the Bible. Thou shalt go to church and invite your friends. Thou shalt talk about God in small groups and in school. The problem is, these things feel like rules. And for people like you that desperately want freedom, rules feel like control. They feel like curfew. They feel like dress codes. They feel like do your homework and eat your veggies. Bottom line, none of us like rules. We don't like being told what to do. We don't like being told what not to do. Even if you're not tempted to drink alcohol or you don't need to cheat on a test, sometimes it's just annoying to be told that you can't. And I bet some of you would say that rules seem to set you up for failure because you tried to follow the rules before and ultimately failed. Like maybe you went to a church service, a camp, or retreat, and you made a decision, okay? I'm gonna get my act together in this particular area, and you really try. I mean, you gave it all that you got. And you held strong for some weeks, or maybe even some months. And then one night, one weekend, you stumble again. And you felt like a total failure because you didn't follow the rules. I'll go one step further to say that some of you love a lot of things about God and church and the Bible. It's just the rules that make you feel like you have to live a boring, like locked down life with no excitement. I mean, doesn't every other area of your life have rules? Like rules at home, rules at school, rules at work. So when you come to church and you hear about more rules, it's like, oh yes, this is so awesome. I can't wait to hear about more things that I should or shouldn't do. But here's a question that has always bothered me. If God made us, and freedom is something that we all want, doesn't that mean that God put that desire in the inside of us? I mean, doesn't that mean that God literally wired us for freedom? And if so, why do we feel the opposite of freedom at church? Like, which is it? And that's exactly the tension honestly what we're going to talk about throughout this whole series. We're going to kick things off by looking at a book in the Bible called Galatians. It's actually a letter written by Paul, who was a leader in the early church. If you never heard of Paul, here's a short version. He was a Christian-killing Jewish leader, and then one day he meets Jesus. But not like he meets someone at a coffee shop. Paul met Jesus after Jesus had died and risen from the dead. So that kind of changed Paul's mind about a lot of stuff, and he became a Christian and a church leader. Back in the day, as a church leader, you couldn't just DM, other church people and start a group text. You had to write actual physical letters, so that's what Paul was doing. And that's how he begins his letter this way. Paul, an apostle, sent not from men, nor from a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. And all the brothers and sisters with me to the churches in Galatia. The last part is because Paul wrote this particular letter to a group of people in the city of Galatia. The Galatians were dealing with a lot of tension. And one of those tensions was this wrestling match between following the rules and giving people grace and forgiveness when they didn't follow the rules. You see, since Jesus was born into an ancient Jewish culture, some of these people had grown up hearing about the law, which was basically God's set of rules for the people that he cared about. And this law was given to the Jewish people. But then they learned about grace, which meant they could still have a relationship with God based off of what Jesus did for them when he died on the cross and was resurrected. Grace allowed people to be connected to God despite failing at the whole rule following thing. So basically, people were confused. They're like, okay, what now? What do we do? What do we not do? Is this about the law and the rules, or is this about grace? Like, which is it? And just to give you some context, the law had some weird things in it, right? Not because God was trying to be strange, but because culture was just different back then. Remember, this is ancient times, and people had multiple wives. They could sell their kids into slavery, weird stuff like that. That's the kind of culture they were dealing with. So if someone back then heard the rules about how to cut their hair, what clothes to wear, and how to prepare their food, they weren't things that were designed to be weird for weirdness' sake. They were things that, in the cultural context of the time, were best for the people based off God's love for them. And right up there in the category of weird religious things came a topic called circumcision. Now, circumcision was a thing that, I'll just go out there and say it was no fun for a guy, okay? Most of you probably already know what circumcision is. But if you don't, ask your parents later on. Okay. Circumcision normally happens when a baby is born, but the conversation that we're going to hear about today was in regards to adult men. Strange? Yes. And to think about it in terms of a religious act in an ancient world that represented someone's devotion to God, that seems straight crazy, okay? But people were asking, do the guys have to take this particular step of circumcision in order to be okay with God? That was the question. Some people thought the answer to this was a simple yes. They should. It's part of the law. God commands it, so people should obey it. And they should obey God. Other people, and I'm imagining the uncircumcised dudes were leading the way in this one, were like, is that really necessary? Like, really? What about the whole grace thing? We're talking about surgery here, people. And it was the cause of some pretty serious conflict. So now we understand why Paul had to talk about it. In chapter 5 of his letter to the Galatians, Paul writes something very interesting. Check it out. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Now imagine people were wondering, why don't you just say that we are set free? Like, why do you say that it is for freedom that we have been set free? It's kind of confusing, right? Well, remember, Paul is writing to a group of people who believes that keeping the law was what would make them right with God. They believed that real God followers did certain things, and circumcision was one of them. And that in mind, Paul basically says, guys, Jesus did what he did so that you could live as free people. So don't act like you're not free, because you are. Freedom means that you don't have to do anything to be in with God. It was now about what Jesus did, no longer about how we follow the rules of the laws. Many of these people couldn't imagine a life where they could walk with God in confidence and peace, regardless of their behavior, or whether or not it matched up with everything they were supposed to do. They couldn't even imagine it. Now, imagine, Paul didn't really say it was for church attendance that you've been set free. It's for good behavior that you've been set free. It's for perfection that you've been set free. It's for losing your individuality that you've been set free. It's for boredom that you've been set free. No, it says that for freedom, you were set free to be free. You were set free to live as free people. When you have a relationship with that's based off grace, you are free to relax. Yes, we're going to have good days and bad days. And yeah, we'll have days where we follow the rules and days where we're off track. But we should always know with confidence that God loves us and wants to be close to us. We're made to walk in freedom. Jesus wants us to be free people. Now, does this mean that we should immediately just ignore all the rules that God has set for us? No. Chances are you don't even want to. You know that rules like don't lie and don't steal are generally good for you. And in the coming weeks, we'll talk about the rest of them. But for now, let's focus on what we do know for sure. Jesus wants us to be free people. And for some of us, that is a big change. For some of you, this comes to your view of walking with God. Some of you have spent your whole life living like being close to God equals following the rules, or not following the rules equals not being close to God. And it feels like your relationship with God is always on the line when you mess up, which means when you don't keep the rules, you count yourself out. You don't show up at church. You don't come to small groups. But you got to remember that it's for freedom that you've been set free. And that means that you are free to be here even when you mess up. You are free to pray even when you fail. You are free to participate in worship even when you feel like you don't deserve it. You are free to be close to God even when you're not being good. You're free to call yourself a Jesus follower even when you haven't acted like a Jesus follower should. That's what freedom looks like. Think about it this way. We all know people that we feel like we have to walk on eggshells around, right? Like we can't say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or they'll get mad. They keep us on edge. But the opposite is true too. We also know people who will love us no matter what, don't we? We all know people that we can be our real selves around, even our worst selves around, and they're gonna love us anyway. What do you do around those people? You relax. And Paul is basically saying, hey, it's the same with God. We can relax in our relationship with God. We have nothing to prove. It's already been proven. Jesus did everything that needs to be done for us to be good with God. Do our decisions and choices matter? Yeah, of course they do. But when you have kids one day, you'll care about the decisions and behavior, but simply because you want what's best for them. And that's what God wants for us. And we'll talk about this later in the series. But for now, if you're a follower of Jesus, relax. There's nothing to prove. The work is done. Enjoy your relationship with Him because that's what free people do in Jesus. Wants us to be free.